The guest in my virtual chair today is Marty Nislick. Marty was my favorite teacher ever. We all have one of those, that teacher that just touched you in a certain way. But as Marty says in the video, he never touched me. I thought about Marty because I had that crazy dream where I was racing through the halls of Beverly High. I had just found out I was 3 credits short to graduate, and I ran to Marty. I hadn't spoken to him in 40 years, so I Googled him, found him, and I invited him on the podcast. I hope you enjoy the show as much as I enjoyed spending the time with him. He's a wonderful, wonderful human.
Hey, baby, it's time for the Nikki Alpert Podcast. Come on, pull up a chair. We gonna have some fun.
Marty Nislick, welcome to my virtual chair. It is so nice to see you.
It's nice to be in your virtual chair.
So I just want to give a backup of how I reached out to you and how for the first time in 40 years, actually, this is the second time we'll be talking. So a few weeks ago, you guys, I had a dream that I'm sure so many, and I'm guessing you, Marty, as a therapist, have heard about people having this kind of dream. I am 54 years old, but in my dream, I am running through the halls of Beverly Hills High School because I've just found out that I'm 3 credits short to graduate, and I am losing my mind. And the only person I can think to run to is Marty. And Marty was our group therapy teacher when I was in, by the way, 9th grade. But
Right.
it was 1980, you guys. It was a long time ago. But you know how you always have that favorite teacher, that person who just touched you in a way that made total sense to you? That was Marty. And so in the middle of my dream, and I hadn't thought about Marty in several years, but in the middle of my dream, in the middle of panic, in the middle of COVID, I thought of Marty. And so I woke up in the morning and I Googled Marty. I didn't know his last name. Marty, he ran the Maple Center 1980 and Beverly Hills High School. There came up his name. I sent him an email. He called me less than a half hour later. And so here we are. So Marty, I'm so glad you called me.
Well, I am so glad that I called you as well. And I just want to correct one thing, or
Please.
make one thing clear, which is that you said that I touched you.
Oh,
And then I touched your heart.
Yes, my heart and my soul. And
Absolutely.
And 54, so 40 years later, I remember that. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing you've heard that a lot over the years. Tell
Yes.
me I'm right, right? Oh,
Of course.
what a beautiful thing. Tell me.
Yeah. I live with a teacher. And so we can't go anywhere in Beverly Hills without her running into a former student who always says, "You were my favorite teacher," and it is so exciting. I get it a lot because I worked in the community that I live in.
Yeah.
So I would see people, and most of the time people were very complimentary and touching their lives. But like with students and therapy clients, you never hear the end of the story. So I am so glad that I ran into you and could hear a little bit of at least the middle to the end of the story.
Yeah. It's not the end yet, thank God.
Right.
But speaking of things that feel like the end, 2020, is it ever going to? Jeez.
December 31st. Yeah.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you was because, I have children and I've been aware of the raise in anxiety that is happening in the adolescent, if you will, the teens and adolescents. And Marty is a marriage and family therapist who specializes in depression and anxiety. And I thought, who better to talk to than you with your expertise and also your sense of humor and your warmth about, Marty, what the hell is going on? What are we going to do with all of this? What is happening?
We're still in survival mode. So we do have to get through all this craziness that's going on while we are nurturing the souls of ourselves and our patients and our friends, and listening to their stories and giving them hope and not getting compassion burnout, all the things that are going on in Zoom burnout. It's really an interesting, crazy time. And so, a lot of people say, well, your business must be booming. And that's a good thing on one hand, but it's not such a good thing because, I'm seeing too many people suffering.
Well, yeah. And not to mention that I'm sure it takes a toll on you. I mean,
Absolutely.
right? Uh, so what do you do to stay positive during all this? I mean, are you giving yourself the breaks you need, or are you just so weighed down by clients that you just have to find the time when you can?
Well, I was thinking about this, and one of the things is I am blessed with a pretty easy disposition. I don't get too far down, and I don't get too high. And so I've been able to deal with it. And I am taking care and doing self-care and staying in touch with all my friends and my family. And I'm fortunate because in my pod, my family is close by, 10 minutes away.
Right.
So that helps. I talk to people, I'm sure you do too, who are pretty isolated.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would handle that. I don't do well in that kind of isolation.
So what do you tell people who sit in your chair or sit in front of your computer screen when they tell you? Like, I had a client call me today and tell me she was so sad because she had to cancel all of her children's flights home for Thanksgiving. She was really depressed about it.
Yeah.
What do you say?
And what you say is it's depressing, and yet, we'll have a bigger one next year. And that, you have to reach out as much as you can and do as much as you can with what you got. It's just reality, I was saying we're having a bat mitzvah here, b'nai mitzvah here in the backyard, and we're constantly changing up until today. How many people, who's coming, where the rabbi is sitting, how many feet apart.
Yeah.
And, we're just adjusting. And so I like to think in our lives, the people who tend to do the best are the ones who are physically flexible, so they tend to stay healthier, and then emotionally flexible, being able to slide with whatever comes our way. And sometimes it's easier said than done.
Right. And for lots of people like you, and also like me, I happen to be that kind of person, but for lots of people, it's not easy. And in fact, it's nearly impossible. So what about those people? What are they supposed to do, Marty?
Well,
I mean, I know they call you, but what about the ones who don't have you? What do they do?
They reach out to, if they have some friends or family. What we do is kind of say, control what you can.
Right.
And accept what you have to accept, and let go of what needs to be let go of.
Right.
And so that becomes your mantra. And some people do it easier than others. Other people get sad and depressed and isolate and then feel isolated.
Yeah.
And those are the people that we worry about. And so it's incumbent on us to reach out to them.
Yeah. And at the end of this, I think I'd like to, and you probably know all the numbers for suicide hotlines and all that. So let's, if we can, remember to do that at the end. But because I've seen that all over Instagram and Facebook, because all that is rising also. And not to make this a super sad situation the whole time, but it's funny because I don't do what you do clearly, but there are all those jokes about the fact that as a hairdresser, and bartenders, hairdressers, and taxi drivers, which did not go to school like you did or any of that stuff, and gynecologists, but people tell us that stuff. They are vulnerable in our presence for some reason, and they open up. And so when people would sit in my chair and they would be depressed about stuff, I would always think about something that I knew was coming up for them, like for you. Tomorrow there's a bar mitzvah. So I would talk about that to just give them, like you said, to think about the things that are good and that you can control about feeling that are going to feel good and stuff. But now, every time I ask anybody, especially in the medical field, well, not just that, but like what's going to happen, the answer is, I don't know. We don't know. With all the uncertainty, how do you help people get over just the fear of, I mean, it's one thing to have lack of, or feeling of lack of control about some stuff, but when the constant answer is from the government, from your doctors, from everything, I don't know. What does Marty say to a patient who says, well, I can't live with, I don't know, help me. What the hell?
Well, I would help them with getting comfortable or more comfortable with I don't know. Some of what, when you talk about you and bartenders and cab drivers and so forth, one of the most important thing we all do is we listen.
Right.
So there's somebody who's asking questions and listening and caring.
Mm-hmm.
That's very therapeutic.
Yeah.
You don't need training for that.
Yeah. Well, I actually beg to differ because I once had a woman in my chair who had a kid who was suffering with depression. And when he first started talking about it, he was complaining about stuff and she kept trying to tell him what to do to fix it and giving him things to try and all that. And they just kept getting in fights. And finally, they ended up in a marriage and family therapist's office. And
Right.
after she was telling the therapist all she had done to make him better and try to help him, and all he did was yell at her and all I did was fight. And he said to her, "But Carol, so while he was complaining to you and you were telling him what to do, did you feel like you were being empathetic and compassionate?" And she said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Mm-mm. Being empathetic and compassionate is just being heard, is listening."
Right. It's very different because we all want to solve. We all want to give people the answers. I know I do all the time.
Yeah.
And people have to be ready to hear the answers. And so most people, if they're in that kind of state, and particularly depressive state, hear solutions as criticism. Because if they could have done it, they would have done it. So what you would say is, well, you're depressed, go out and exercise. Well, I'm so depressed, I have a hard time getting out of bed. So you're telling me something that I can't do, and it makes me feel worse about myself.
Makes me feel bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know for myself that if I do a couple of things every day that I can control, like I know that getting on the treadmill means that my blood sugar will be at a good place all day. It just will be. Just 20 minutes. It doesn't matter what time of day, but I know that. And in those 20 minutes, when I'm done with that, I feel like I've won. On the days that I don't do it, some days I feel like my body needs a day off because I also lift after that and all that. But on the days I don't do that, or the simple things that I know I can control, it's like the things that, like if my blood sugar hits a certain number, I could cry all of a sudden because I didn't have any control that day.
Right.
So the things, like you said, the things you can control, but like, again, then there's the people who just feel like they can't. One of my friends had a client come to her chair yesterday who's been in such a funk. She hasn't brushed her hair in 6 months. And so it was a ratted mess. And my friend had to cut it really short because they couldn't get it out. I mean, that.
And, and when we talk about that kind of overarching depression, then we need to look at either Eastern medicine or Western medicine, and they may need a medication consult
For the imbalance.
to help them through the help. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was saying, I see a lot of males and a lot of, teenage boys and young men. And my go-to is turn on Impractical Jokers.
Oh, it's so funny.
So in essence, I'm saying, find something silly to laugh about.
Yeah.
And what's been a boon is sports has really been helpful, in the last few months.
You mean it coming back?
Coming back, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And, getting people's minds off themselves. We're so centered now. And if we cough once, all of a sudden, we think we have COVID and what's going on, or if we have a sore throat or something like that. And, we forget that, we might maybe have a cold or we're hoarse or that, we have an allergy.
Yeah, but the fear is real. I mean, anytime I've stepped outside, and it hasn't been that often, just to go to the doctor or whatever, even if I don't really have to cough, all of a sudden I'm driving home, so I wouldn't even be sick yet. And all of a sudden my throat hurts and my ears, and I feel like a nervous hilaria.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that? What is that switch that happens? Where is that in my brain? And what happened? What causes that? Is there something that you can explain that causes us to do that?
Yes, anxiety.
Well, there you go. Oh.
And, it's the white coat syndrome when you go to the doctor's office and your blood pressure.
Oh my
And
God,
so
my daughter does that.
And so that's why they, wait a while until you're more comfortable, and then they take your blood pressure again. Yeah.
Oh my God, Livy was like 4 and her blood pressure was like 180 over, I don't know what the numbers are supposed to be, but it was horrible. And she's 21 years old and she has to say to the doctor, look, you need to give me till the end of the appointment before you check my blood pressure because you're going to think I need meds and I'm fine.
Yeah.
the anxiety
So
is so
something
what?
else that I encourage people to do
Oh,
is
please.
be of service. Help someone, whether it's making a call, making a donation, when you can be in person to hand out food, whatever you can do.
Yeah.
That's so curative. And once again, gets us out of ourselves and gets us in touch with somebody else.
It's funny. I was listening to somebody the other day who's in AA, and he was talking about his horrible days where he thinks about doing or using. And there are 3 questions he asks himself, and I can't remember the other 2, but one of them was, have I been of service to somebody else today? Mm-hmm. And it is amazing how just being kind, which seems to be such a thing of the past all of a sudden, makes you feel so much better.
It's amazing, people will say to me, this guy held the door open for me, and he was wearing a mask and everything. And it becomes such a big deal when people are showing some kind of kindness in our society right now where, Ellen is preaching kindness,
Oh.
but then, the government and everybody else is so unkind that it becomes a big deal.
It really is. And think about the times, how many times have you held the door open for a woman or a man and not had them even say thank you? Like, what is that? Like, it's so weird to me that people just don't go out of their way to be as kind as they can all the time. In fact, I embarrass my children when we're out, and I'm always so kind to people. I see a pretty baby, I say to somebody, or a baby who's doing something cute, and I'm like, oh my God, your kid is so cute. I see a woman who I think is beautiful, and I say to her, wow, you're just amazing to look at. What a beautiful face. Or my kids are always like, Mom, it's okay to be kind,
Nikki, we talk about isolation, and the opposite of isolation is connection.
Yeah.
You are amazing at connecting, and that both makes the other person feel good and makes you feel good.
It sure does. It sure does. It's interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
You will get a runner's high from that connection.
That is a great description of that. Speaking of connection, and I think it's about to happen for the second round, when we first were isolated and it was happening all over the country, and then you saw people who were singing from their balconies, and people were really coming together. We were isolated, but we were doing things for each other together. And I think I'm starting to see a little bit of that happen again, which I think might be the upside of Corona, if you will. Mm-hmm. Do you see an upside to this at all?
Yeah, of course. Our closets are cleaner. Our drawers are neater. I think we take connection a little more seriously. We miss our friends. We see that we don't need as many material things.
Stuff.
We're taking a look at our diets. All of these things, in terms of mindfulness, I think more people are meditating than ever before.
Yeah.
And hopefully that stays. But it's sort of the traffic accident, speeding. We slow down for the accident, and then 2 minutes later,
you're 85.
This is, taking enough time that hopefully it sticks.
Yeah, because it's
remember that
it's not just the drive-by. It's
right.
A long time so far, and it doesn't look like it's ending.
And even after we get the vaccine, the economy, the whole world, is going to need a long time to heal and recover. And so, they're doing a lot of studies now on compassion fatigue and with caregivers.
Yeah.
And I think just compassion fatigue all around, people, get tired of hearing the stories of somebody's uncle dying in the hospital alone, and getting used to that now. And that is so horrible.
Yeah.
Until it hits your family and you can't be there, not for the good events, which is okay. It's, when people are living alone in the hospital and dying alone. That breaks my heart.
When I hear those nurses who talk about what it's like to be there for that person, who just can't believe how it's happening. You know, I had a friend who suffered tremendously. He and 12 of his friends all went to Northern Italy, and they all came back and got sick. And my friend was the 1% of that group who took it to the very worst. And when he was under, his nurse, now he was patient zero, so the nurses had a lot more time to spend with him. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so when he was under, right before he went under, he said to the nurse, "I don't want to die." And she said to him, "We're not going to let you die. Don't worry about it." And she kept his cell phone charged, and she called his sister and his girlfriend every day while he was under and had them speak to him on FaceTime and look at him. And then, and his dog who he loved so much. And she bought him a stuffed animal that looked like his dog after she saw him for the first time, and she stuck it under his arm while he was in a coma on a ventilator. And she says that a tear rolled out of his eye when she put the dog under his arm. And he swears to God that that is what saved his life, that hearing his sister and his girlfriend tell him how much they loved him and all of that stuff. And the nurses don't have time for that kind of thing anymore. There's too many of them.
Right. But that nurse needs to, I'm sure she's getting it from all over, but you know, I don't think we're doing enough for
them.
The compassionate caregivers. Yeah.
And what about the PTSD that's going to stick with them after all of this?
Yeah.
When they do have time to let their guard down and fall apart, then what?
Hopefully they're going to all get some support and some therapy. And I know a number of therapists have been volunteering their time for people who just can't afford it. Part of it is, you know, they don't have a lot of time to do it.
Right. Right.
And they're caught in the game, and you know, you have to keep up a certain energy level. You can't let yourself
fall
get
apart.
Too affected. Yeah.
Which is so weird, because I think, I mean, I could never be a doctor or a surgeon, God forbid, for that reason. But I think, you know, if you are in that kind of job, you get used to the bad days happening every now and again. But in this case, you can't get used to that. You just can't. I mean, there's no way you can get used to that. I can't even imagine.
So when we talk to therapists, and someone will say, well, how can you stand listening to all those stories? And isn't it depressing? And for me, it's sad.
Yeah.
But, you know, my job is to help. And if I get too depressed,
you can't help.
No. So I practice airplane therapy. And airplane therapy is simply, you're on the airplane, flight attendant is giving you the advice and the rules. When the mask falls down, they say, put mask
yours on first.
Right. And so I put mine on first, and I encourage people to put theirs on first.
So, but at the end of the day, how many people do you see a day? On a busy day?
On a busy day, between 8 and 10.
Okay, that's a lot during a time like this.
Right. It's particularly a lot on Zoom and FaceTime. In person, it's so much easier. But you know, it's a different fatigue, and I'm much more tired doing it from home than from the office.
So you don't just mean because of the screen time?
It's because of the screen time.
Okay, but
let alone you know, the situation. But if I'm seeing 8 and 10 in person, that's a much easier day than seeing 6 or 8 on Zoom or FaceTime.
And why? What's easier about that?
There's more of a connection. There's more feedback from me. And so, you know, I don't have to work as hard because, you know, I'm trying to get facial gestures and look in somebody's eyes. You know, in person, you can see somebody's eyes cloud or tear. You know, on these outside sources, it's hard to see that.
Yeah, you can't see their body language. You can't see their leg flopping up and down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what's most interesting is, you know, someone will say, is all people talk about COVID and the election. And the truth is, it really isn't. It usually is a kind of starting point. But then, you know, we get into everybody's story, and everybody's story is different, and their pain is different. COVID and the election has accentuated
Right.
the anxiety. But if somebody's having a problem with their mother or their spouse or their teenage children or what school that they go to, that, these are ongoing problems that I deal with every single day.
And they're exacerbated by what's going on.
Absolutely.
For certain.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I when I think back, because it's been so long since I've stood behind the chair, people come running in and they're like, they've got a cup of coffee and they just had their lunch in their car while they were driving to me and they're really hectic. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm 5 minutes late. I'm going to go change. I'll be right back. And then they change and they come back and then they sit down.
Right.
And there's that transition that happens when they know that I'm about to love on them for 30, anywhere from 90 minutes to, whatever. And you're missing that transition, I would guess, in virtual stuff. So
absolutely, because I have, kids wandering through and they're doing businesses and their phones ringing and so forth, where, there's a transition from the waiting room to the office. It's probably 20 steps, but something magical happens in those 20 steps. And they walk into the office, and I happen to have a really lovely office, like your background is so lovely.
Thank you.
And it's very relaxing. And it was interesting because something you and I talked about the other day that I thought, I hadn't thought about, it's fascinating, is that when people are sitting in your chair, they're looking in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking to you from behind.
Looking at themselves.
Looking at themselves. There's something safer about that.
Oh, sure.
Than sitting in a therapist chair. And that's why I often will say to parents, particularly when they're having a difficult time with their kids and their teenage kids, go for a ride where you're not looking at them face on and you're looking straight ahead, and you can have an easier conversation about more difficult subjects.
I think that's why children and parents have such good conversations in the car, like you suggested.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, if they looked up, they could see my face.
Right.
But once they get that vulnerable, like you said, there's something that happens. They sit down, like what imagine you must walk into the room and you can see the people who are slumped over. You can see when you open the door to the waiting room, you must size up what's happening right then before they even open their mouth. Then they come in, and then they come into your beautiful space, which is completely out of their discomfort, but their home, their office, whatever it is that drives them to you. And then they're in that safe place. And so the difference with me is that I'm there and they want to talk, but they're not really looking for advice. They just need to vent. And when they come to you, they're looking for advice, but they might be nervous about what they want to say and might think that you're going to judge it, like you said, because they're asking you what you think for the most part. Nobody's asking me what I think. Doesn't mean I don't tell them anyway, but.
But, I was thinking about when I get haircuts, and I'm not usually relaxed because I don't necessarily, I have a hard time trusting that they're going to do it exactly the way that I want to do it. And, after I build up some time with the same person, which I've been fortunate to see, it's a much more relaxing experience. And that's what you get repeat customers who trust you, that they don't have to be watching you cut and making sure you don't cut too short and do any of this stuff.
Oh, I've done that though.
Well, I'm sure.
I remember two funny stories. One, I cut some girl's hair from elementary school. She was so excited to have me do her hair. And I guess I cut layers that were too short. And she literally sat in my chair after for like a half an hour. Remember those dolls that used to be able to pull their hair and it would get longer? She was doing that like it was going to get longer. Oh, I kept thinking, oh, it's not going to help. It's not going to help. Please stop that. It's making me feel worse. And then there was the other time when I had a guy come to me. He'd been coming to me for years. And when I finished, he gave me a really big tip. He'd been coming to me for when I charged $35 for a haircut. And over the years, he had been raising my price because I never did, but he was lovely enough to say you couldn't possibly be paying your rent at $35 a haircut anymore. And at this time he gave me a 50% increase on the increase he had given me just for the tip. And I was like, what's that for? And he said, well, for so many, in the beginning, he said, you were so bad at cutting hair. I just realized today that over the years, you've gotten so much better. I really thought I would tip you. And I was like, why did you keep coming back? And he said, because you're charming and you're fun to be with. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. So thank God I can connect with people for all those times I couldn't cut hair yet.
Always looking for the second date. That's the art.
Well, then there was that all ended. Boy, did I lose a lot of clients. I lost a lot of clients once I got married because of that whole thing.
Right.
And then I also lost a lot of clients after I had kids because then I knew for sure I was staying with the guy.
Right.
And also the women who then didn't identify with me anymore, because it was one thing that I wasn't single anymore, but now I wasn't even, I wasn't going to go to a bar. So that was a whole different thing. Okay, well, speaking of transition, how has it been for you, the whole teleconference thing? Like, you're talking about how much more difficult it is. And is there ever a time when you're in between clients, like, do you give yourself more than 5 minutes that it takes to, go pee, wipe your nose, and go get another client? Do you end up ever taking an email or seeing the news and something terrible has just happened and you're thinking about that when you have to, like, what happens when you're on the computer all day long?
Yes. The answer is sometimes something will take me away. And, the good news is I've been doing this long enough that I can put it away. The harder things are, when things are happening in my personal life. Mm-hmm. And, it's sort of a rule of thumb of therapy that whatever is going on in your personal life, one of your clients is going to have the same thing.
Of course. We're people.
So, yeah. And so, I think about it. If somebody has the same illness or something that's happened to me, I'm a therapist that shares a lot. So a lot of therapists don't, it works for me. And so it doesn't become my session, but I wanted to normalize things for people. If they have a particular fear or something, that happens. But they're usually things that I've worked through, as opposed to things that I'm struggling with. Right. I wouldn't share that with somebody because...
By the way, I'm struggling with this. Can you recommend anything? Not a great thing for you to say. I can get away with that behind the chair. Yeah. You can't. It's funny because I was going to ask you about self-disclosure, because as a rule, most therapists don't self-disclose. But again, you do build relationships with people. And so I'm sure that there are people, even for those who don't in general, that they do. And like you said, like if I were a therapist and somebody sat in my chair that had diabetes, I would say, hey, so do I. If you want to talk about that, I'm a great person to talk to about it. Maybe off of not during this, but so that I can help you as a diabetic, not as a therapist or whatever. But
and it would be, I think, impossible for me not to share things with some of my teenage clients or my young adult clients who are struggling and feel like they're the only ones in the world. They're coming to me for, just advice to normalize themselves.
Yeah.
That they're not crazy and they're not the only ones that are dealing with this, and why me and all of that stuff. And so I believe that's probably why I'm successful. If somebody has other disorders that they're going to project a lot onto me, then I'm not going to share as much.
And I'm not sure I know what that means.
That they have problems in relationships with men and so forth. So they're going to project a lot of things on,
I see. Because you're a man.
Right. And if they are, am I pretty enough? Am I all this kind of stuff? That, careful what to share. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not on social media.
I like that. I don't think a lot of people are going to be on social media after all this. I think talk about being fatigue of things. Fatigue of social media is a huge one. Mm-hmm. So I had a thought.
But let me just also say, it's the teacher syndrome of teaching in the same community that you live, where you're seeing little kids and they can't believe that they're seeing you in the market. And the same thing with
Dr. Marty.
Yeah. so excited. I remember I saw one person at the farmer's market, and she was an adult,
Yeah.
and I hadn't seen her in a while. And she comes running up to me, and if I see someone out and about, I won't, in there in a crowd, I won't go up to them and say hello.
That's right.
So they're not in an
They would say,
awkward
that's my
position.
therapist. I'm crazy.
She runs up to me and she's hugging me, and people are walking by, and she's going, "This is my therapist. This is my therapist."
I think in old movies, wasn't there like we know each other from the old school or from the old people, when people really didn't, when mental health was like, you didn't talk about it. And there was a thing they used to say in movies. I can't remember what it was. God, I wish I could remember it. It was hilarious. And of course, as soon as we're done with this, it'll come back to me and then I'll text it to you.
Right.
So do you find that during all of this, even though you are a guy who shares, that your clients ask you, how are you doing? Are they doing that more now?
Yes, much more.
Do you love that? Do you hate that? Do you love that?
You know what? It is something that you look at, or I look at, and kind of say, some people use it as a defense against wanting to talk about themselves.
Okay, so you got to
figure
out where it's coming
look
from.
At that. But because I tend to have very strong connections with my patients, I think they generally care.
But you can tell who's doing what, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I tell them, how I'm doing, in a general sense,
Mm-hmm.
and then what I'm doing to help me so that, I watch Impractical Jokers. I watch silly movies and comedies just so that I'm not watching Grey's Anatomy, which is all about COVID and people dying.
Oh my God. Somebody I know, I guess the new season just started again. And she was saying that she indulged and it just took her back, and that she was just so depressed the next day. She couldn't stand it. Like,
Yeah.
When it was starting, we all thought it would be over by now. And to watch it all happening there, she said it was so depressing.
Yeah. I find that too. So.
Oh my God.
And so, as you can imagine, in the last 3 or 4 months, the news cycle and the election, really, I thought that was more impactful than COVID. It really took so much out of people and made people so anxious about what's going to happen and is our way of life, and, what do we believe, and these stories, and most people just did not feel safe.
And there was no escaping it. It's funny.
Right.
I in my research with you and with everybody, I always make a bunch of questions and then I throw it out the night before. So I stop looking at it and then I can just respond to people. And if my questions fit, they fit. And if they don't, they don't. And one of my questions was, is there such thing as too much news? But for the comic relief situation here, I would have my computer read my questions to me over and over again when I'm on the treadmill. And something about that question and the voice on my computer, she read it like Roseanne Tana. And so I was so afraid that I was going to say to you, Marty, is there a thing as too much news? Because I kept hearing it that way. But is there a thing? Is it too much news, Marty? I think there is.
I subscribe to this magazine called The Week. Do you know that?
I don't.
It's like Time Magazine. It's a compilation of all the best news stories.
It's good news.
No, but part of it is they send me every week the good news newsletter. Mm. And there are 5 stories each week of good news.
I'm getting that.
And I spread that around to my family. And so I need to balance that. Yes, there is too much news. And, and how many different stories can there be from 6 to 11 at night? They retread the same stories.
Yeah. It's like watching the same car crash over and over and over again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's so just to backtrack for a minute, you were talking about when you give advice, how it can seem like you're judging somebody, or people aren't ready to get advice until they're ready for the advice. Mm-hmm. Years ago, I was doing a lot of motivational speaking, and It just happened. I was in a group of women who were new moms, and something about me made people feel better. And they asked me to come to their group and talk to people and turn the conversation around and make it more positive, which out of that grew a company that I started called Positively Positive, where I would go and moderate conversations amongst women. And I did an exercise where I was at the Valley Beth Shalom Temple, and we were in Palm Springs at the Tess Parker. Is that what that thing is called? I think. And there was 150 of us in a room, and it was mothers and daughters.
Oh.
And and my mom was there. It was so nice. And I probably didn't think so then, but now that she's been gone for so long, looking back, I'm really glad she was there. And I don't remember what I said, but I had a statement, and I said, we're going to go around the room and everybody's going to say the same thing. But when somebody who says it in the room says the same thing I say, but when you hear it from someone else and it touches you, I want you to raise your hand when that sentence coming from whoever it comes from touches you, and recognize how often it doesn't when it doesn't come from the very right person.
Nikki, what a great exercise. I'm stealing that one.
You take it. It was amazing, because what I would say to people was, look, I'm not a therapist. I can just motivate people to connect to one another. And if you can't see yourself in me in any way, I can't touch you. And so if I say something to you and nothing about me resonates with you, it doesn't matter what I say. It's just going to be like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. And so when you connect with somebody like you do, and then you wait to give them the advice because now they have that connection and you've disclosed enough of yourself to say to a kid, I struggled with that when I was your age. And look, I've gotten through it. Well, of course, then they want to hear it from you. And when you say it, it's like the clouds and the skies open up and the possibility is in front of them all of a sudden.
Right. It's sort of what AA is all about.
Yeah.
Where, people tell all kinds of stories. You may not relate to the specific story, but you relate to the humanity of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that you were talking about struck me, and that is, I will often say to people who talk to themselves so harshly and will say, would you ever say that out loud to your best friend?
Right.
And 100% of the time they would say, no, never.
That's right. Then why do it to you?
Yeah.
If you hate you as a friend, get rid of it.
Right.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the best advice you can give friends to help one another over the next however many months this is going to take?
Be human, be real, show up. And I say that to everybody. Just show up. Most of us don't know what to say. And I don't always know what to say.
You don't have to say anything.
You're right. You just have to show up and be there for people. And, learn how to get comfortable stepping out of your discomfort zone.
Yeah. And one more thing, Marty. I'm sorry. Sure. No, go and tell me what you're going to say, and.
Laugh and smile. The people who can laugh at themselves have a much easier time laughing with and at life.
For certain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, as you said, not all people are born with your infectious charm. You had this when you were a kid.
I didn't say that. You said that.
I said that. And I don't want to use the word infectious because that's a bad word right now.
Right now, no.
Yeah.
But I will take that as a compliment. I appreciate that. Right. I think, your advice about being kind and showing up, a woman I met whose kid was on my daughter's soccer team a billion years ago. And apparently the soccer coach just didn't show up one day, and the first day. And there were all these 6-year-old girls. I knew nothing about soccer. And I was like, all right, girls, I'm your new coach. I knew nothing about the game, you guys, nothing. And I kicked the ball around with them for a little bit. And then somebody whose boyfriend played soccer became the soccer coach and whatever. But one of the women on the team, we were friendly. She just found out she has breast cancer. I haven't spoken to her since the kids were 5. My kids are 21. And I found out. And I was like, oh my God. And I wrote her this sweet message on Instagram. all I did was just say, look, I'm here. I've never had cancer, but I'm sure you have a million friends. But at times like this and times like this, I think we need as many people as we can possibly collect to pick us up when we fall apart and be there in case we do. And even if we don't, just to have on our side. And so I'm on your side. The letter of gratitude I got for that 3-paragraph message from a woman who hadn't heard from me in 16 years, it just made her feel so much better. And it took me all of 3 minutes. So yeah, you guys, be kind. Just show up and watch Impractical Jokers.
Nikki, since your call to me, and it made me feel so good, I reached out to my favorite high school teacher, Alan Klotz, and he taught at Beverly.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and I reached out and how you doing? And we had a great conversation. And so I guess what you and I are saying to everybody who's watching and listening, pay it forward.
Yeah.
Send it out.
Yeah.
It comes back to you 100-fold.
1 billion-fold. And it just makes you feel, okay, one more thing though. What's your favorite thing about your job?
I have a parking space in my office. No, that. I love people. And so I get to be with people in the highest moments and the saddest moments. And if I can help, it really makes me feel good. And so I'm good at it, and it nourishes me.
And it nourishes them.
And hopefully it nourishes them.
I love to hear that because, like you, I have seen people in their, you know, they're about to have their baby, so I'm getting them ready to doing their hair the last time before they have the baby, or the day that they're getting married, I'm fixing them up. And then, of course, they get divorced and they come to my chair, or God forbid, they lose their mom and they come to my chair and fall apart. And I love every bit of that. I love to hear the sad stories. I love to hear the beautiful stories. And I think the thing I get from the sad stories is, well, number one, it makes me feel like I'm not alone. You know, when my mom died, I think I had 113 girls and I counted every one of them in my chair that year, who lost their mom. Mm-hmm. And it helped. Yeah. I would never hope that anybody loses their mom, but to know people who did also, it changes your moment. And to hear people's life stories and to be lucky enough to be someone who people want to share their life stories with. You know, I mean, haven't you learned so much from your clients also about who you want to be and who you don't want to be at times too?
Absolutely.
What a gift is that?
Yeah.
Look, it's amazing. We are so lucky, aren't we?
We are very lucky.
During this crazy time.
Yeah. And we just wish that everybody else, you know, has an easier time. We used to say have an easy fast for Yom Kippur, and we now say to have a meaningful fast. And so during these crazy times, we hope that people find meaning in their lives, and we will all get through it together, and we will.
Okay, I was going to end it, but I'm sorry. I have one more question. How do you feel about it when people say, we are in this together?
I love the concept. I wish that were true. You know, the old expression, no atheists in a foxhole. But we have to be in this together because we cannot do it alone. If 70 million of us are wearing face masks, but 70 million aren't, it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
So we hope that people get in touch with their better angels.
Yeah.
And maybe we can, you know, through the political process and just through people realizing that we need each other now more than ever.
Yeah. Again, meaningful. Make it meaningful. Make every bit of this meaningful. Be in the moment. Don't think too far ahead because you don't know what the answers are anyway. And the truth is, we never did. Somehow we used to think that we had control of something. And if this hasn't proven anything, we've never had control of anything except for the moment you're in and how you feel about it.
Absolutely.
Right? So here's to meaning, here's to life stories and sharing, here's to connection. Marty, I cannot thank you enough. And please don't go anywhere because I'm not done talking to you. I just don't think I can drag people down a conversation with us for another hour and a half. But I am so grateful.
I love this.
You
I love that you reached out. It is so fun, nice to see you 40 years later. And hopefully we've got another 40 years to go.
I would love that. And I'm so glad to know that you reached out to your teacher, and I can't wait to hear more about that. I hope everybody enjoyed listening to Marty as much as I did. And I just can't thank you enough. You've been wonderful. Don't go anywhere, okay?
Shabbat shalom. See you
Shabbat
soon.
shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see what I'm doing.